Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the third session of the Metro Atlanta chapter of the AMS and NWA's virtual webinar series. My name is Sid King, and I'm the current president of our chapter for 2020. We launched this webinar series to encourage the sharing of scientific knowledge and to create educational resources that are free for all to use, even in spite of our chapter not being able to meet up in person due to COVID-19 concerns. We have 6 speakers presenting webinars for our summer series. So far, we have had 2 guest presentations from Nikki Hathaway and Jared Rennie back in late June. For anyone that missed those webinars that is interested in learning more on the presentation topics, the recordings have been uploaded to YouTube and posted to our Facebook and Twitter accounts. The remainder of our lineup of presenters is still taking shape, and our plan is to continue to keep you all up to date as the topics, dates, and times of the future talks are finalized. And that brings us to today's speaker, highlighted in magenta here. Today, our guest speaker is Logan Poole. Logan is an alumni of the University of South Alabama and Jacksonville State, where he obtained a bachelor's degree in meteorology and a master's degree in emergency management, respectively. He's received ample experience from all over the discipline in field work, forecasting, TV media, and emergency management. Today, he's going to be giving a presentation on the Easter 2020 tornado outbreak and tying that into his insights on storm damage surveys. So if you have any questions about this topic, feel free to type them into our chat window, and we're going to answer them at the conclusion of the talk. Logan, are you ready to take it away?
Yeah, I am here.
All right, ready when you are.
All right, so I'm going to share my own screen now. Before I do that, guys, I'm Logan. I do a lot of stuff. I had done a lot of stuff, as Sid mentioned just a moment ago, media, field work, academia, everything in between. But less about me and more about like what we're going to be talking about today. Let me see if I can get this survey pulled up real quick. Share this for you guys. Okay, we're going to be talking about this past Easter, primarily focused on southern Mississippi, a couple of long track tornadoes with an event that happened on Easter Sunday this past year. And then we're going to talk about the meteorology of that, what led up to that, what the forecast was like, and what the thinking was. And then we're going to talk about what it was like trying to survey something that was borderline EF4, EF5 range, and we don't get those a lot. So let's get started on this. This is a picture near Collins. We're going to start off pretty high impact. This was a chicken farm. I guess they're trying to rebuild it, so it probably still is a chicken farm, but it was in somewhat of a degree of disrepair in this image. And you can see the defoliage off onto the horizon. You were looking from west-southwest to east-northeast here. So this is the trajectory the tornado would have been taking. So a little bit of a meteorological synopsis, and I understand some of you may be using some devices into your, I guess this side for me, but on the side of your screen, the camera may be covering some of the text. I think you can move that if that's happening for you. So I'm not going to read these explicitly, but this is kind of what we were looking at. We knew there was going to be a lot of moisture in place in the boundary layer and the low level of the atmosphere. The Gulf of Mexico was abnormally warm. We had a surface low that was deepening coming from the southern plains into the Ohio Valley. We had close to a phasing of the upper jet stream. That's a little bit of an arbitrary statement, but I will look at that and you can make your judgments there whether you think that was phased or not, but it definitely was interacting closely with both northern and southern streams. And we had a high low level and deep layer shear. So we're going to look at that really quickly. This was the Gulf. Obviously, the tornado was the following month, but this was for the month of March. And of course, the temperature anomalies at the top. So you can see we were solid 3s and 4 degrees F above Fahrenheit above average across the Gulf. And ignore the little blue spot. That's a little anomaly associated with the loop current, but it's not really representative. In general, very warm water across the Gulf, and that resulted in very deep moisture. You see on the left, that is your 70-degree isodrosotherm, or where the 70-degree dew point line was making up. That's about 20 Z. It's about when the tornadoes were happening. So honestly, the tornado roughly followed this 70-degree isopleth there as it moved from west-southwest to east-northeast. And then, of course, you can see from a sounding in Jackson at 18Z, which was, of course, 2 hours earlier around lunch, you see we were just north of there, deep moisture, ample shear, moisture all the way up to 850 millibars, but we did have a significant capping inversion aloft. So this is roughly where your low was moving. About 20Z was located over near Shreveport, moving northeast. And you see your winds back a little bit there, south of Jackson. And those of you who don't know what that is, Jackson is in Mississippi. We're talking about the state of Mississippi here. So yeah, west central Mississippi is where Jackson would be. Tornado was south of there. So this is the 500 millibar analysis at 12Z that morning and 0Z in the afternoon. You can see that you have a 500 millibar trough in the northern stream, and it's somewhat displaced from your southern stream trough. By 0Z, you can see how they're not exactly phased there, not perfectly aligned, but they are much closer, and you can see that your southern stream trough is beginning to take on a bit of a negative tilt there, which is going to increase the divergence and associated mass transport. So a very volatile situation was unfolding. And then, of course, a little sickle-shaped photographs here. The left is LIX, which is near New Orleans, Shreveport. If you guys don't know where that is, the right is Birmingham, of course, which is in north central or central Alabama. What you had was an interesting situation where to the left in the Shreveport, which is the southern, below where the tornadoes were, so more southerly than where the tornadoes developed, you had very significant instability developing, but your wind shear wasn't as extreme. You still had significant wind shear, but not as significant as you see over in Birmingham. But in Birmingham, you were still significantly capped with much less instability. So you can imagine somewhere in between there, these storms found a balance between utilizing the instability that was being made available from the south while they were moving towards and into better sheared environment. So again, very volatile. And this was at 21Z, so roughly at the time the tornado was ongoing. This is roughly what the Weather Service had outlook for that day. Moderate risk, and the Weather Service did a great job, I felt like, with that risk, and you can see that. Obviously, it's not overlaid, but that northernmost tornado was just north of Jackson. Tornado from a long track piece of a line segment or quasi-supercell. And then, of course, the storms we're interested in today, that red track across the south, which, again, was still inside that moderate risk and pretty well forecast by the Weather Service there. So good job to those folks. So this is what I'm really more interested in for this particular event, and I try to hurry through that intro into the meteorological synopsis. Very volatile day. This is what's interesting to me in the following days. I'm in Mississippi now, so I did work with Weather Service and some independent contractors to better visualize what may have happened. This was all captured using a drone that I flew there over the course of several days, and you can see the ground scarring there and the vehicle, which is kind of in the center of your frame. And this is near Bassfield, Mississippi. And there's a little bit closer image of that vehicle. And we're going to be looking really closely at that because that plays an integral part in this story. That vehicle is in the middle of the field, and you can see an image there. This is a bit, let's see, I see a button. Oh, it's a chat button. Someone's out talking. Okay, sorry. These trees were fairly defoliated. A lot of debarking, particularly near where the core of the tornado went, and that's indicative of a strong tornado. And you see that vehicle not in a happy place there. Again, a slightly different angle. You see trees laid a lot of different directions, frankly. So this is close to where the core of the tornado moved over near Bassfield. And just give you an idea of what it looked like when it impacted property. And this actually wasn't when it was the strongest. It was still a violent tornado, but not that high-end EF4. The bottom right-hand portion of the picture, you can see what looks like railroad tracks almost. Those are the rails of a mobile home. So mobile home is gone, and that's what's left of the rails of it. You see multiple empty lots that were not empty, I assure you, mere days before. And you see the trees, of course, in pretty damaged situation there. So a lot of course, this was a deadly tornado, and this is a portion of where it unfortunately hurt a lot of folks. So, damage indicators. I'm not, you guys are welcome to. I'll provide this link later. Obviously, I'm not going to click it right now. But what we're talking about is when we look at tornado damage, there are certain things that we know correlate with tested degrees of damage. So we're looking at, is this power poles down? Is it transmission lines? Is it homes? Is it apartments, box stores, large span buildings, so on? All these things have very specific indicators. So what we're talking about today is how you differentiate between a strong EF4 and an EFI. How do you make that judgment call? So a couple of things I want you guys to pay attention to as we go through the video, in particular in a moment, are anchor bolts. I'll point those out. Were the slabs swept clean? Debris loading, meaning how much of the impact was because there was debris impacting the structure that you're interested in. When we're trying to rate or assess tornado damage, we're more interested in the damage caused by the wind. So debris loading can cause that to be modulated in a way that maybe isn't always obvious. So we're looking at, and remember, also looking at the wall to the floor and the roof fastening. How are they connected? What's the construction of that? And then we're looking at the tree damage and the displacement, as well as debarking. So this is going to be just your synopsis, as if you were a damage surveyor for this particular area. We're looking at one building here, or one small section of the path. So imagine the poor weather service meteorologist having to do the whole thing. It's really difficult and a lot of work. So we were following along this apparent tornado track, and we found a single floor residential home that was obviously heavily damaged. We interviewed the homeowner, who was also the builder. He built his own home, and he suggested that the construction of this building was superior to other similar buildings in the area. He had told us that he was construction as a career. He was a construction worker. He owned a parts supply place, and he took great care in his design. And he tells us he used the best practices and materials available. He's very confident in that. And our initial survey of the property doesn't really dispute that this was the best built building in the area that suffered that kind of degree of damage. So at least for that area, it was fairly well built, as we understood. So some damage indicators of primary interest here. I want you guys, we're looking at a single family residence, which has the code FR12 and the number 2 in the damage indicators. If you guys, I'll give you guys that link later, and you'll see how that's all listed out. And then we'll have hardwood and softwood trees that we're interested in. So this is a video. Occasionally when I play this video, it kind of messes my audio up. I'm going to try to talk over it. So if you guys have an issue, please feel free to throw something up in the chat. So that is an anchor bolt, which takes from the slab there you see, it takes it up to this wood. This is a sill plate, which is what allows the wall to be connected to the foundation. And you see how that bolt there was attached. That is one of the 2x4s that comes up from the foundation and into the wall. Important how those are connected. And of course, you see that anchor bolt is bent, which is really important, but it still has the nut on top. So it didn't pull the nut out, but it did bend the anchor bolt. The fact that this property had anchor bolts is already showing potential strength of construction, and in fact that it was affected them in some way is important. And because you guys can see just how far that car has moved. Now, important to know that we discovered later that this car was in front of this house when it was displaced. I was using, don't be like me, carry a tape measure with you when you go to measure these kind of things. Like that was, at least dollars and $10 bills are uniform, so you can use that to tell what size things were. So the important thing there that I was showing was that sill plate appeared to be a 2x4 as opposed to like a 2x6, which would have had more surface area. So there's some room for the construction practices to potentially have been a little bit higher than they were. Still very well built as far as I could tell, but had room for improvement. Now I want to pause this right here because I want you guys to look at it carefully. This is the tornado path through a forest. And we actually had a couple of guys looking very carefully at this. And this is something you don't get to see very often, but the forest, the trees, the softwood trees here, the pine trees, actually allowed you to see almost like a fingerprint, I called it, of where the tornado met. You could see the circulation pattern there, which I thought was really interesting. Something we don't really get to see too often. It takes a tornado that's capable of leveling entire forests to get that kind of image. So let that play through just a moment. All right, this is important too. Let's see, I'm going to send that out. I know it's playing, but these trees, if you notice, the root balls for one are still attached to the trees. The trees were snapped, but the tornado actually pulled them out from the ground. That's important. It's in part of our damage indicator and some of the surveys we're doing. The other thing that's important is if you notice the root balls aren't necessarily co-located to where they came out of the ground. Like you notice that tree next to the creek there, it's not, there's no hole there next to the tree. So that tree was completely uprooted and then thrown an indeterminate amount of distance. Of course, you see some of those trees debarked as well, indicating again a powerful tornado. And again, we come back to this vehicle because I'll tell you why in just a few minutes, but this is really important. So pay close attention to this as this video gets really close. I want you to look at it's wrapped in wiring. This is one thing I noticed very early on, and we discussed with several different contractors, independent agencies. What it appeared to me had happened, and this matched up pretty well with what the homeowner's record was that the car appeared to have been thrown through the building. So that may have contributed to some of its catastrophic failure. That right there is part of the home. That's wiring from the home that apparently became wrapped around this vehicle as it theoretically flew through the home. You can see another close view there. So really important. We're talking about debris loading, and that's impact by a foreign object makes it difficult to understand just how strong a storm may have been. So we're going to step through this. There we go. So what are the results like, right? When you're trying to do a damage survey, it's not always a certainty with what the degree of damage is. But we're trying to look at the ranges. So for example, we can look at this 1 or 2 family residences, which is the 2 FR12 we talked about. So what we do is we say degree of damage, meaning what's the rating for what happened? What was it, barely damaged, which would be a 1, or was it completely destroyed of a well-engineered building, which would be a 10. And then when you look at that, there's a range of possibilities for and maybe one structure is slightly stronger than the other. Maybe tornado, it's not exactly locked in or guaranteed that it was 100 miles per hour that did this. There's a possible range, and we call those the lower bounds and the upper bounds. And the average or the expected value is in the middle. So for, say, degree of damage 10 for this home, if we say it was well constructed, well engineered, and a slab was swept clean, which appeared to be the case. There were a few sill plates that were still connected, but by and large, it was fairly swept. So you can give it a 9 or a 10 rating there, perhaps. And again, we're a little bit arbitrary and up to the individual surveyor. So then you look at your bounds, right? The expected value for a slab swept clean would be 200, which if you look on your left, 200 greater is EF5. So you start to question, is this an EF5 damage indicator? Is this telling us this tornado should be rated EF5? But then you discover, for example, that perhaps an object like a vehicle was launched through the car, launched through the home, excuse me. So maybe it's not entirely fair to say that it's 200. Maybe it's more 190, 195, high-end EF4, which is still extraordinary damage, correct? So that's kind of what we have to do when we're looking at these surveys, is figure out not only what was damaged, but how badly it was damaged, how well it was constructed, and then we have to discover, was there any altering circumstances like debris loading. So I believe the current Weather Service calculation for this was high-end EF4 for that Bassfield tornado damage. And you can go and look at for yourself, honestly, and you can see where some of that is recorded in their damage survey. I'll try to make that available to you as well. And then beyond that, it's still up for debate, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of papers and people who are much smarter than I am who comment on that with engineering backgrounds and so on. But this is kind of just a little intro into how difficult these surveys can be and what you have to look for, particularly when you are trying to differentiate between high-end EF4 and EF5 damage. So questions and compliments. Sid, if you want to take over from here, the floor is yours, and I'd be happy to answer questions, and we can go back and look at some videos and pictures if anybody's interested in that as well.
All right. Thanks again, Logan, for an excellent and informative talk. Once again, here's a list of our speakers for the series. Next week on the 15th, I'm going to be the next speaker, and my topic is going to be Inside the National Weather Service and High Impact Georgia Weather. And we have 2 more talks after that for the summer series, and then we're going to get into a little bit of a break before we try and start a fall series. So over the years, our chapter has hosted a variety of events with the purpose of building a community of meteorologists and weather enthusiasts from all backgrounds and walks of life. The purpose is to collaborate and share their knowledge and perspective with each other. So to that end, I'd like to take a moment to thank our officer team, Steve Gregg, Sarah Tonks, and Brad Rubin, for all the diligent work that they've done to help make this series a reality. Here's a list of all the different ways that you can connect with and follow our chapter over various media. If you'd like to learn more, please feel free to check these out and reach out to us. So that concludes today's presentation. On behalf of all of us in the Metro Atlanta AMS and NWA, we'd like to thank you all for your attention. In difficult and unprecedented times, science and expertise are as important as ever. So we're going to open up the chat and tackle any questions that we may have.
Hey, Sid, this is Charles. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Hey, great presentation, Logan. Just a question, I've never done one of these. So how long does it typically take to do a survey, or in this case, in this particular survey, how long does that take you to complete that?
It depends on the storm, honestly. For this particular storm, it's kind of open-ended. There probably will be numerous papers, and it's entirely possible that the final tally or survey may be amended in the future based on new data or what have you. This is a lot of ground covered and a lot of different storms, and frankly, I think Weather Service Jackson, which is where a lot of this occurred, had one of the most active tornado years ever for this region. So they have a lot of their hands with other surveys as well. The drone technology we've been using lately does seem to help a lot. For example, there was at least 2 or 3 tornadoes this past year that ground surveys alone were unable to find indicators. So they would have had to not mark those as tornadoes because no one saw them, but they did have, for example, radar signatures that were clearly tornadic with, if you're familiar with correlation coefficient drops and things like that, where we know that there was debris lofting. And with the drones, we're able to get up and see some of these forested areas and even add tornadoes to the record that we may not even known existed otherwise. So it's a changing and kind of a moving target. I would say, Sid can comment on this as well. I'm sure he's been a part of them with the Weather Service. But it takes as little as half a day to as many as weeks. And when you have these large tornadoes that are borderline EF5, I don't know that we could ever confidently say that the case is closed.
Thank you.
I had a question myself, actually. So if we're looking at a damaging tornado and we see an extremely strong signature on radar, like powerful gate-to-gate shear, and we know we're going to be looking at a high-end tornado, but it only goes through the woods, and so you only really have trees to gauge the damage by. What do we do for the EF rating in that situation?
That's an interesting point. And what it really tells us is that when we're doing an EF scale rating, what are we really looking at? We're looking at not just rating intensity of tornadoes, but we're comparing the likelihood of both a strong tornado existing and it also impacting a structure that allows us to understand that it did exist. We do get better, I think, with time. Matter of fact, there were a couple of independent contractors that were working with us on this project who are in forestry and are trying to do better about understanding exactly what tornadoes do to forest and vegetation so we can have a better estimation. But it is an inexact science when you're trying to use this fingerprint or, damage to figure out what happened before. And as chaotic and violent as storms can be, and honestly, you can't always know for sure. And it's almost a certainty that there are numerous violent tornadoes that would have been rated much higher had they impacted structure that gave us that knowledge. So definitely an interesting part of this when you consider that they have to hit one of those damage indicators we talked about to be able to rate them higher, even if, in theory, the tornado could have been as strong as one elsewhere. I think we've done a good job in the industry about bringing in multiple people with different expertise and experiences because this is obviously a phenomenon that we haven't completely mastered yet. There's still a lot about tornadoes and tornado environments and tornado destruction that we just, we're still learning every day. And I don't mean to necessarily make this timely so that people don't understand what I'm talking about, but yesterday, from when we are recording this now, there was a significant tornado in Minnesota that was at times only 10, 15 feet across, and yet did some tremendous damage. I believe there may have even been a fatality with that, and I did see some evidence of some trees that were debarked. So you're talking about a tornado that just feet across, that may be EF3, EF4 range. We'll have to see what the survey comes out to be, but that's a possibility based on what I've seen. And I don't know that I would have expected something that small to be able to do that kind of degree of damage before. So we're learning stuff every day, and it's really important that we bring as many people into that conversation as we can.
Awesome. Any more questions? All right. Hearing and seeing nothing, that concludes our talk for the day. Thanks again for being here, and we hope you can make it to the talk next week.